Okay, so today we're dealing with assignment 1, and this is the assignment that you were given. So to go and have a look, does your institution have an ethics policy? And then if it does have, is there anything that is covered in the manual, in the chapter on ethics? Does it cover that? Are there any gaps? And what would need to be added to the ethics policy for it to be in line with the manual? If you don't have an ethics policy, then the assignment was to draft one, covering the main points that are in the manual. So if you've got an ethics policy, to review it. If you don't, to draft one. And then there were also some questions, 2 questions for your policy or additions. What points will meet the most resistance from managers, from researchers, and from collection managers and collection staff? And the second one was, how would you go about changing the existing policy or getting a policy adopted in your institution? So it's not just about having the document, it's also about, well, now how would you get it implemented, formalized and implemented? Okay, so let's just think about the ethics policy. Most institutions do have a code of conduct for staff, and it can be usually quite a general document. It's similar in all institutions. There's one for the public service, and it's just general good conduct. So there are important things in there. Some institutions have a general ethics policy, and it says how you must behave in an ethical way, and quite a lot of institutions also have a research ethics policy. So often there are these policies, but few institutions have an ethics policy that is focused on the collections. Or they might have a policy, but it doesn't say anything about the collections. It just talks more broadly. So the first step in this assignment was really to go and look, what documents do we have that talk about ethics or conduct or ethical behavior. And and often then you don't even know where to start. Where do I look for the documents that my institution might have? So let's just get some input and find out from you. Did you go and look? Did you find something? And where did you look?
Good morning.
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 Morning. We can hear you.
Okay. Yes. We did look, but actually, I was going to ask a question before you called my name. Because in Zambia we do have a number of policies. I think as far as I could find, we don't have one policy called ethic policy. We have a number of policies that speaks to ethics. For example, we have a code of conduct, which is actually general for the whole institute, not only for collections. But there are a number of policies that speaks to some of the aspects that are covered in this chapter. For example, on the one that deals with collecting of specimens in the field, the ones talks about the loans, quite a number of things. I could actually share the spreadsheet if possible, that you can have a look at. But so what we could find is that we don't have one single policy, but we have a number of policies that speaks to the aspects that are in the ethics. Yeah. Now, my question was going to be, of course, when we go through them, we could identify gaps. For example, most of these policies are more than 6 years old. They are due for review. And things like that. And then some of the aspects that are covered here are not necessarily 100% covered in some of these policies. Now, my question was going to be, do we need then to just discuss the gaps that we found, or do we need to find a way of writing one policy?
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. So there's an example that I'll show you of, so Bernard Zipfel and Sifalani, they did their assignment together. Bernard said that I could show you what they did, and they've got the same thing at WITS. They've got lots of different documents, and he looked at them and he said that, well, they sort of cover this and they sort of cover that, but they don't cover this. And so it's looking at what you've got and documenting where the gaps are. And I think that's like a policy review. But if you don't have a specific one that deals an ethics policy for collections, you can also draft one. But I'll show you what Bernard did, and he didn't make a whole policy. He just said these are the problems, and this is what we need to do to address it. So that's an approach that you can use. So it's really, I mean, this exercise is about very much about looking at what there is and reflecting on it, and looking for the gaps and thinking, what else do we need to do? All right. Anybody else want? Thanks, Mashiani, for that input. I think that's going to be quite a common situation, actually. Anybody else want to come in? Otherwise, I just have to pick on people. Andrea, I saw your assignments. So it seemed like ARC, the OVR, also didn't have an ethics policy for the elections.
No, so there was no policy for the collections. There were old ones for the ARC per se, but that was back to 2008, so that hasn't been updated for a long time. So we'll also be drafting one for our collection from scratch.
Okay, all right, yeah, so I saw what you've done, so that's also great. Thanks, Andrea. Sunny, do you want to come in?
Yes, good morning, Michelle. So basically what I had done was that I only looked at the ethics policy. Like Mashiana, I'm aware that there were others, but then because it was the singular ethics policy that I thought we were supposed to be looking at, I then basically went through it. I think they would say we krita. I crited that, just going on and, writing out all the discrepancies, whatever's missing and all of that. And then not necessarily drafting a new policy, but I think from what you describing from Bernard, what they've gone and done is to then say, these I think would be useful inclusions. And of those, this is what I think people would have the most problems with. So I did it in those sections. That's what I've gone and done. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah. So thanks for that. So I looked at, I think there's 6 assignments that have been submitted, and it's great because they're from very different institutions. So I think there's 2 from universities, and one is a research collection and one is a teaching collection. And then there was the ARC and who's the other science council? Oh, the Council for Geosciences. And then I think that maybe, anyway. So it's very, very diverse. And what I realized is there's no one right answer, or there's no one exact way to do this assignment. I think, what's being done is acceptable. So I'll give some feedback specifically to those people who submitted their assignments. But there's not like one answer and one way that has to be used for answering this question. So yes, it's really just to get people to look and reflect and to think about an ethics policy. There's not one right answer. Thanks for that, Derek.
Well, when you started looking, we discovered I'm by myself here doing the course, so we don't have an ethics policy, so you then write one. So I've done a very, very rough draft of policy writer. So if we're giving scores for this I'm probably not going to score very high, but doing the best I can. But I have answered the questions. Where there will be some pushback, in terms of from managers and collection managers, and it's all going to affect everybody, this ethics thing. So I just want to point out that we don't have any, like there's none, but we've been using the ICOM one, which is, I did want to say, so we're not just follow our own way. We are guided by international standards and just live in a bubble is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, that's me. That's all I have to say. Okay.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, so I
All
think that's a common situation. And of course, ICOM, the Code of Ethics, or the ethics guidelines for the natural history museums or collections, I think they say, very useful. It's very good. And we've based a lot of our
I noticed that. Yeah. When I was comparing the two. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But
that's me.
I think the important thing about having your own ethics policy is it's then means that it's much more meaningful in your institution. Yeah.
And you can have someone responsible if there are queries. Whoever wrote it, you can go to them and say, what do we do in this situation? Okay, that's me.
Thanks, Derek. Fulu?
Thanks, Michelle. So for those institutions without a policy specifically for the collections, but they have one for the entire institution or for some of the departments, who then have or write the one that's specific to the collections.
Yes. Yeah. So if they look and they see we've got an ethics policy or we've got a research ethics policy, look at them and see, does it mention the collections? And if it doesn't, then it's note that as a gap. And then you might need to say, okay, I think we should have a policy for the collections, and ethics policy, and you can draft it. So I think that's a good point to go back to the presentation, and we can look. I've given more guidelines about this. Okay, so I think that the key points are here that often there's lots of different policies that might have bits about ethics or about code of conduct. Look at them, just have a quick look at them, see if it mentions anything about collections. It probably won't. And you can just note that. And then if you do have an ethics policy that mentions collections, look and see what it says compared to the manual. And if there's nothing, then you might need to start. So if you've got an ethics policy or code of conduct, these are the kinds of points that really need to be included to cover the collections. Because these are really, especially if you're in an institution that is focused on collections, then these are points that are really critical to the way you operate everything. It covers loans, it covers visitors, it covers use of the collections and what can be done to them. It covers your curation responsibilities. It covers your health and safety, your disaster and risk. So all of that is under an umbrella of ethical principles for collections. So the first point, and I think a lot of institutions do have a collection research ethics policy, and it says that you must have an ethics committee and you must get ethics approval for projects being undertaken, or if you're collecting specimens. And this is becoming more and more required when you submit a permit application or you submit a proposal for funding. they want to know about your ethics committee. Collection ownership. So this is also really critical, and I see it there isn't this principle being applied. Collections don't belong to institutions. They are held in trust for the people and for future generations. And so it's a sense of stewardship or custodianship of the collection. The custodians have been looking after them on behalf of, some people even say, the world, the globe, and it's not only for the people now, it's also for the future. So it should say something like that. Collections are irreplaceable, valuable assets. So something recognizing their importance and their value. And then a statement about the duty of care for the collections and the people who work on them by the institution. Legal acquisition of objects or collections. Something about limiting the impact of collecting on the environment, on populations, and on individuals. So where you maybe collecting animals or taking samples from animals, there's a whole animal welfare aspect to that. And then access. So it can't belong to one person there or one unit or to the institution. They should, there can be rules, but they must be accessible to the people. And that's also the data and the photographs. And then this whole thing of balancing use with long-term preservation. So it's not a free for all when you allow access. You've got to still have built in that balanced use. A free flow of knowledge associated with the collection. So there's also a responsibility to publish work, to make data accessible, to show people what you've got, maybe on the internet. So free flow of knowledge. And then the principles, and quite a lot of code of conducts or research ethics will also cover this: honesty, integrity, objectivity, carefulness, openness, respect for confidential information, intellectual property rights, copyright, social responsibility, and competency for the collection. So, and there's also some aspects, you can also have conflict of interest in there. So that's also a big thing. But I think quite a lot of these will be covered in code of conduct or in your research ethics, sort of those documents that you need to check. And then also in the manual, there's a paragraph, and I think it is important in the South African context that this may not be in the ICOM Natural History Collections Ethics, but it's probably in some of the other, even international policies, but in our country, in our context, the recognition of our past and recognizing Indigenous knowledge and its owners, and also just about access and about participation that's inclusive and practice that is transformative. So I think that it's important just to think about how you would incorporate this. And I think one of the assignments I looked at, they had actually put something in there. There's a thing about traditional land ownership, and you might think, well, why is that in our ethics policy? But often if you go out collecting into tribal areas, you just see it as like free for all. You don't have to ask permission. You don't have to go negotiate and find out who the chief is and go and ask them permission. You don't have to involve the people who live there. And so it's respecting, when you do collecting, respecting that traditional ownership and not just Western style ownership. Okay, so the thing is to go through your ethics policies, go through your code of conduct, check. If you do have an ethics policy for collections, check that all of this is covered. Note the things that are not covered. Okay, and so you're going to look for gaps, you're going to look for irrelevant details. So these are the main policy guidelines that should be considered in all collection work. and all other policies should align with them. There's no conflict. So that's why we also started with this, because this is like your overarching or your umbrella kind of policy, and everything else aligns with it and fits in with it. But you must be careful to not include details of all the other activities. So Derek said that his policy that he's drafted is very short, and that's good. Policy should be very short. So you don't want to go start talking about. Okay, so yes, so make sure you don't have details. So if you had something like that as your policy, that would be fine. It should be very short. If it becomes very long, pages and pages and pages, it's very difficult to implement, because everything, all the critical points are buried in lots of information. And so policy should really be like a 1 page, 2 pages at the most. So short is good. So that's what I'm saying about irrelevant details. So go back, if you draft something, go back and check. Are they just statements, policy statements, or have I started to describe procedures and processes and go into detail about all these other things that could be there? If you have, you can shift them into some kind of an appendix and put them aside and pick out the key points. So that's the thing. Details will be in other activity-specific policies and SOPs. So acquisition of collections and objects. Your policy statement is that they will all be legally and ethically required. What that means and in detail will be in your acquisition policy. The same with deaccessioning. So if these are your valuable assets, and it's your duty to care for them, when do you give them away? Those details will go into your deaccession policy. Your access, you'll have a separate access policy. Your curation and collection management policy, you know, so this policy statement is we will care for these. It's our duty to care for them, but all the how and other rules will go into a different policy or procedure document. So yeah, so the question is, if you know, have you got any of these points from the previous slide in your policy? You can just list anything that's missing. Is there lots of very specific detail in your policy? What is it about? Should it rather be in another policy or in an SOP? And you can summarize it if there's pages and pages of points. All right, so you don't have to put all the detail into your assignment. You can just summarize. I had, you know, this, if you've got a policy and it's got lots of detail about process, just in your assignment say, we've got a policy, but it includes lots of procedures. Okay, so that's if you find something and you review it. If you're going to draft a new policy, if you decide we need one, and I'm going to do that for my assignment, I'm going to draft it. There's not much that is creative here. It's really, I've put the points in that first slide or that earlier slide. Look at the points there. Look at the points in the first section of the manual. Look at the ICOM document for ethics for natural history collections. And ICOM also have an ethics checklist. They've got 8 points, and select the points that are relevant to your institution and its collections. So, for example, there's no point in including something about human remains in a herbarium, because I'm almost certain you're not going to have human remains in your herbarium. But it may be very relevant if you in a paleontology collection. So, for example, I think the evolutionary studies one they've got. So then it is relevant. But even in a herbarium, you may have some cultural artifacts, and then you need to put in something about those. So I remember, I think there may be some collections that are specifically about traditional use, and there may be some artifacts that came with those collections. So yeah, you've got to think about what have we got and what's relevant to my kind of collection. And here I say it's a maximum of 10 points, but ideally 6 to 8 points in your policy. All right, so I'll stop sharing, and if there's any questions or comments here, we can go into that. Nothing clear. So it's not really a difficult assignment. The most difficult step is probably finding where do I look for these documents, and which ones do I go through and which ones don't. But once you're over that, and then maybe just looking through them. All right, so if there's no questions there, doesn't seem like there's any. Derek, should I submit my rough draft? You can. So, so maybe we can just pause here about the course. So what we're asking people is to submit the first 6 assignments, or however many you're doing from these first 6, to have them submitted in as a draft by the end of February. Right. So, we can look at them and give you some feedback, and it just means that then you have got some pressure on you to do it. Otherwise, you're going to leave it, and then at the end, you've got 10 assignments to quickly do. It's better to catch up now if you haven't done anything. All right, good. Okay, so let me go back if there's no other questions. Okay, so that's to do with the policy. Why is nothing going? But then there's also 2 questions that you need to answer at the end of, that after you've done your policy review or drafted a policy. Policy is, so, you're not sorted once you've drafted the document or once you've got the document. It's not done yet. There's often resistance to aspects of that policy, and people either just don't comply with it, or they don't implement it, or they argue against it. And so that's a really important thing. And there may be different things that different people don't like in the policy. So managers, researchers, collection managers, and curation staff. So what the question was, which of those points, those critical points, do you think these different groups of staff will not want to implement or feel that they can't implement? So which points will be most difficult for each of these staff to accept? Not just say, oh, it's okay, I'll do it, but will actually, for them to really do it 100%. So this is I've just used this list that I drew up. And if you think about it, for managers, which of these do you think there will be most resistance to? So the first one, an institutional ethics committee or ethics approval being required for all projects undertaken. You think managers would object to that? The collection ownership, so being custodians and not owners. The irreplaceable valuable assets, duty of care, legal acquisition, impact of collecting, allowing access, balancing use, free flow of information, honesty, integrity, and the South African context. So which of those do you think managers would most resist or not want to put into their policy? I can't see everybody now, but I'll pick somebody. Derek, let's hear from you. So do you think your managers will say, no, I don't think we can put any of these points into the policy?
Manager is very for this whole policy and is fully supporting me in this whole project, this whole course that we're doing. So I'm reading through this, and I don't see her objecting to any of these. Yeah, she's quite, hands-on. She she sees the reason for, there's no, we've got a small staff here, so we've only got one manager, so I only have one person to to deal with. So, but I don't see this being a problem. See, that's the thing. Now I've got this question, and the actual answer is no. So it's very short. But allowing access, maybe that's difficult because now you got to have access control. There's a monetary thing that comes in. It's only when there's a monetary thing might be prohibiting because we've got a limited budget. But most of these I don't see it.
No, so what I was going to say is it's a principle. So in principle, your collections are accessible to not only to your staff, but to others. So all the details about payments, everything can go into an access policy. But this is a principle. So it's a policy statement or a principle. They are accessible to others.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So maybe yours isn't such a difficult situation. Let's hear from somebody from a big institution. Roberta, aren't you from Sandy?
Hi, Michelle. Yes, I am.
Right, okay.
Yeah. But I don't think our managers can be resistant to this policy. But I think maybe curation staff can have a problem with accessibility because some staff feel like they own the collection. They don't believe or feel like it should be accessible to everyone. You need to you have to jump through hoops sometimes to get access to some collection. But other than that, I don't foresee any problems.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Mashiani, you had your hand up.
So, but looking at the points that are here, currently the managers we have, no, we wouldn't actually experience any problem. Perhaps maybe from some of the staff, especially relating to the second point, the one of collection ownership. I think from staff, but from the managers, no, they are quite very understanding, and the collection is accessible to most stakeholders.
Yeah.
So, but there's always a way around how we access the collection. But from staff, but not definitely not from the managers.
Okay, thanks, Mashiani. So if I was a manager, I have been a manager. I would be a little bit scared about the legal acquisition. So, because once you've got a policy, you have to implement it. And it means that then you have to kind of make sure that everything in your collection has been legally acquired. And you know how difficult it is with historical collections. You can't always show that. And so you might have to make it clear that it's from now, it's not historical. So that would be something that would make me a little bit scared. And I'd want it put also into another kind of policy. I think as a manager, that would probably be the one that I would be a bit worried about. And, for small institutions, I don't know what they do about an ethics committee. So I know at Sandy, we've got an ethics committee, and I think the universities have a whole lot of ethics committees, but I don't know what the tradition is about an ethics. So every proposal, every bit of research or collecting has to be approved by an ethics committee, a properly constituted ethics committee. And I'd also be I would be a bit worried about how do we do that properly, as an organization. Lee?
Good morning, all. I hope that you can hear me. My internet connection is somewhat unstable. That's exactly what I was going to raise, Michelle, just those 2 points. I think the greatest opposition will be from researchers who contribute to the collections, and yeah, collection staff, because this is quite onerous. I know with us having undergone this exercise within, since the inception of NSCF with regards to compliance, documentation, regulations governing our actions and daily duties, etc. It's very onerous. And we also have to bear in mind, people question, well, why aren't you accepting this donation of material? You're a museum after all, aren't you? And some people just don't want to face that. But we have made some concessions for that in where it speaks specifically, instances of exception to the rule in your acquisition policy, for instance, where it might be top specimens, for instance, brought in by a member of the public. It's actually our care of duty to accept that, even though the people might not have. But then again, we've got some, and in the SLPs, then we'll have something speaking to inform KZN Wildlife. This is your little workflow to make it all legit. But that, yeah, and in the ethics committee, indeed, that we haven't included that. Well, I haven't included that in the ethics policy statement. It's to say that this should be the case. But I mean, to constitute the proper, especially animal ethics committee, you need 5 categories of people sitting on the committee, including the NSPCA, another one being a veterinarian. And for a small institution, it's just not feasible. You have to develop all the documentation, the forms, the policy behind that. So that's more something, I think, for smaller institutions that we have to look towards the NSCF community for assistance with, and yeah, something that I would like to contribute towards, but obviously as an aside to this. So yeah, we do have an ethics policy, but it's a whole collective for all the heritage departments of eThekwini, which again, and I think that's also going to be something in response to question 1 in terms of opposition. They still want the standardized approach. And while it's good to try and have an all-encompassing ethics policy for all the heritage, so the art gallery, the local history museums, it speaks to policy because it's broad sweeping statements, principles, but there's certain things that we do need to make mention of specific to the Natural Science Museum. So that becomes, in terms of this push to standardizing, it becomes a bit difficult to try and get everything in an ethics policy that we should have for the Natural Science Museum. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. So that's a useful insight. I mean, that's something else, is that often institutions will say, that these big institutions, they don't want everybody having their own little policies. They want like a big overarching policy that covers everything, but then to try and get your collection specific points in there is very difficult. So that is it's also a challenge, and managers might say, well, rather put it into the institution's big policy about ethics. Let's not have separate policies. All right, Eunice, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw it.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I put a question in the chat. I wanted you to explain more on the balancing use with long-term preservation. What do you? I really do not understand.
Okay, so what does that mean? That means that, these collections are for research, and they need to be accessible and they need to be used for research. But you also have to make sure that it's that they can survive for future generations. And so you can't just dissect and pull apart and throw away specimen after specimen, or you can't cut bits off for DNA and cut until there's nothing left of very special ones. So it's a fine balance. It's a very difficult balance, but you've got to recognize both aspects. We've got to use them for research, but we've also got to make sure that we don't destroy the entire collection.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we've looked at managers and their attitudes, but I think managers they might be fine. Just try and go to my next slide. Okay. But what about the actual staff who are working in the collection? So this would be your researchers and the curation staff, so the technicians and collection managers. So which of these would they, Leah's already said this ethics thing for researchers can be a challenge, especially for a small institution. So they might say, I can't do that. Mashiani said there's an issue with collection ownership. So there is often a sense of ownership. I collected these things, therefore it's my collection. And there's often also like and even from managers, there is often a sense of it's our collection, we own it. So even if we don't use it, we don't look after it, it's still ours, and we've got a right to not look after it. The collection ownership, I think, is an issue for managers and for researchers, collectors. They get very possessive over the material that they've collected. Any others here that you think researchers will push back against and say we can't, we don't want to do that, or have a problem implementing? Mashiani?
Yes, thanks, Michelle. Maybe, yeah, I think the second bullet from the bottom, the one that talks of a free flow of knowledge associated with the collections. Yeah, I think by experience, I think we're going to have some issues around there, because I think the kind of research done here in itself, so not many people are actually open about what they are doing and willing to share with everyone. So, so I think, yeah, there we might actually experience problems, unless perhaps if there's another way around it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so that can be, people don't always, I mean, it can also be like photographs of the specimens. Researchers often don't want to put them onto the internet because they're worried about a number of things. One can be people going back to the place where that thing was collected and, collecting too many of them. It can be because somebody might see it and realize it's a new species and describe it before the person who collected it. So yeah, there are quite a lot of issues around that free flow of knowledge associated with the collections. Eunice, sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the balancing use that you explained with long-term preservation, because I believe that in our own institute, some of them will want to use it, and because they are fragile, they will not be able to bring it back or to keep it back. So they will be thinking of using it and not bringing it back. So looking for a way to use them and not to disrupt any of the parts like the legs or the wings. So I think it might be challenging, but I hope if it is in the ethics, it should be a laid down rule that everybody gets to follow.
Yeah, Eunice, I think it's a very difficult thing because, if you're working with those very fragile things and their legs just fall off when you touch them, like mosquitoes and some of those flies, so difficult to work with. And you can't really say to a researcher, you can only use it if you don't break its legs off, because they're going to fall off. And so then it becomes that then your collection's not used, and researchers will go somewhere else, or they'll go and collect material that they don't need to collect because it's in the collection already. So that's finding that balance. But I think also the researchers are under pressure to publish papers and to do the research. And often they're not under pressure to protect the collection. And so that's where you can get that they may find it difficult to follow this principle of balancing the use with long-term preservation, because their agenda might be different to the collection preservation long-term. Yeah, that's a good point. So I think your researchers are going to have a problem with quite a few of these things. The ethics, collection ownership. I don't think the third one they will have a problem with, or the fourth one. The fifth one, legal acquisition of collections or objects. Have you always got all the permits you need? Have you got landowner permission in writing? Have you got your Section 20? That may often be a big problem. It's just, and it's not because they're crooks, it's just because it's so hard to follow all the permitting requirements. And so I think that there'll be a lot, researchers will, collectors will have a lot of challenges with that point. I think most researchers are, they don't want to harm the environment or population. I don't think they'll have a problem with that. Access, allowing access in principle, yes. Maybe when you get down to the little details, they'll have a problem, but the principle of access, I don't think there's a problem. Balancing use with long-term preservation, we just talked about that. There will be issues. The free flow of knowledge, there can be issues. The principles of honesty, I think people, this is a research ethics one. But often there'll be a conflict of interest that might not be as obvious. All right, anything else about the researchers and what they might find difficult to accept as a principle about the way they work, not just the details? Eunice, your hand's still up? No? Okay.
Sorry, it was an old hand.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right, so you can see often there will be a challenge. And then if we look at the collection staff as well. So if you're responsible for this collection, you might not want to let anybody use it for research because it's your collection and you look after it and you don't want it damaged. So you might have a problem from the other side as a collection person responsible for the collection. You might want to push the researchers away. Yeah, all right. So just go through them and just think from the perspective of a researcher. So this is also one, these collections are irreplaceable, valuable assets that must be cared for as a priority of the institution. So this may actually also be a management researcher conflict kind of thing. Because what we often see is that the collection is not being cared for because there's no staff and there's no budget and there's nothing to look after it. But there are staff, but they're collecting more material to put into that collection. So that is a very, very tricky thing, because if you are responsible for the collection, you prioritize it. And that statement is saying it's a priority. It's our duty to look after what we've got, not be adding more to it that we can't look after. And so there, the researchers love collecting more material. They want to collect it for their research. And that's their priority, but there's no money and there's no staff to look after it once it comes into the collection. Can you see an ethical challenge there? All right, any further comments on thinking about this from the perspective of from managers, from researchers, and from collection managers and technicians? Nothing, no, I can't see anything. Okay, so that's the question there, just to think about those critical points that are in an ethics policy and say, I think these are the ones managers would find difficult or have challenges with implementing or would be resistant to. These are the ones that researchers would, and these are the ones that your curation staff would. All right, so the second question is, how would you go about changing an existing policy or getting a new policy adopted in your institution? So what's the process? If you are a collection manager and you see we need this, who do you go to and what process has to be followed to get a ethics policy approved? All right, and then how would you get it adopted in your institution? So you get it approved, and then how would you get it adopted? What is the process to get it signed off? And then once it's signed off, how would you make sure that everybody knows about it and works according to the points in it? So this is just like it's not critical to answer this, but I think it is also an important thing to think about. So often, I mean, in SANBI, we've got about 160 policies that are not collection related. And we've got a policy for everything. But how many people actually know about all of them and know what's in them and know where to find them? You know, so just having many policies isn't always the way to work in the right way. So how would you suggest that you get it implemented once you've drafted? All right. So that's it. Any questions, comments? We'll have a look at, just to give you an idea, we'll look at Bernard's assignments so that you can see. It might not be what you've done, might not be what you were thinking of doing, and like I said, that's fine. There isn't one answer for this question. Sharing there. Is everybody happier about the assignment, about developing an ethics policy? Yes, Lee says yes. Anybody still not sure what to do for this assignment? Or not sure about what an ethics policy for collections would look like? Yeah, Derek says he's fine now, so yeah, yours is probably just fine, Derek. Nothing else. Okay, I'm going to just see if I can find assignment 1. So this is Bernard Zippel and Sifilani Jira from the Evolutionary Studies Institute. So what they did is they looked for institutional ethics policy. So WITS is obviously a huge institution, and they've got a whole lot of different things. They've got ethics standards. They've got a whole lot of different ethics committees. But then he said, we don't, our unit doesn't have, and Paleosciences doesn't have a dedicated ethics policy. And, you know, there's all these research ethics committees. So this is completely different to the situation that Lee was talking about, a small institution. And so you can see he's kind of, they've working together, they've reflected on what have we got. You know, all ethics, all researchers, including staff and students, they have to get ethics clearance before any research is done. And if you fail to get ethics clearance before research is started, then you can actually be in big trouble. So he said there's no specific ethics policy for the collections. So scientists didn't apply any formal ethics to their work. In recent years, there's been greater awareness. So things are changing. So I think traditionally there wasn't a need for this ethics policy for the collections, but we've realized that there is now. Yeah, so they use the existing ethics committees. And then he said in terms of the collection ethics, that in the manual, the following are covered by the BITS ethics committees. So using the collections must be held accountable to the public, must adhere to social and moral values, as well as research ethic codes. And they do have human skeletal remains, which is now a very, very big ethical issue. The use of living animals and experiment work. Anyway, so this is just to show he's gone through everything. He said what's in there compared to what we've requested. So they may be defined as ethics today. Either way, they are not covered by any ethics policy. So these are not collection ownership, but there are others. There's SARA, the South African Heritage Resources Act or agency, and university policies. So SARA, so they're operating also under different kind of set of ethics that's outside of their institution. And then so they've said, you know, this is beyond the research ethics. All other ethics are covered to the greatest extent by legal and university policy too, and institutional rules and regulations. These may or may not be defined as ethics per se. Either way, they're not covered by any ethics policy. So they don't have anything in the university ethics policy. And then, yeah, they've just looked at where there may be, this is the two points within the university that may meet the most resistance. Adhering to collecting, cataloging, and curation policy. You don't have to put in this much detail here. He's gone into a lot of specifics. You don't have to do that. And then how would you change a policy? It's fairly simple and straightforward. A suggested draft. They've explained what they do. So you can see he hasn't actually done a policy. He hasn't drafted a policy, even though they don't have one. He's looked at what their policy, ethics policy environment is. What are their ethics committees? What other rules govern ethics in the way they work? That may not be all in their own institution. It's also in, they've also got to think of SARA. Okay, so that's just to show you, and I don't know, Andrea, your assignment is there. Can I look at it?
Yes, you're welcome. But I also see it's 4 pages long, so there's a lot of wishy-washy information that I've got to take out. But yes, you can.
All right. Let's just see. I don't know which, let's see if I can pick up who it is. Yeah, so we've also got one from Daniela. And so, yeah, the collection ownership there and the art, the intellectual property is a little bit difficult. Okay, so this one, this is the OVI one. It was Andrea, and I think you worked with other people, hey?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so this is like the background to your institution and what is actually, so this looks like it's mostly a research ethic. I don't know if you want to come in here. Yeah, you've got an ARC ethics policy. Okay.
Yeah, that was the ARC one that we found that hadn't been updated since 2008. So the collections didn't have, it's not mentioned anywhere that I could find. But I used the manual as the guideline. So I copied and pasted a lot of that and just then removed that which wasn't applicable to the collection. And yeah, it's just Kirsten and I in the collection. So yes, so there would be no resistance from any managers because it's just us. And then when we were trying to find information on new policies and procedures, It's quite difficult in hold of the legal department at head office. So that was basically, I just used the signature line that we use for our SONOS accreditations. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is probably fine.
But too much detail.
Just go through it and just see what you think about what could come out.
Yeah.
But I think it's,
Okay.
it's actually fine. It may just be a little bit somewhere. So a little resistance, and then your things are okay. All right. No, so that looks good.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So I'm not going to drag us out any longer. I think we've covered the main points. I'm hoping that those of you who may have felt like you don't know where to start now have a better idea. Those of you who wondered if what you've done was right, now I can go back and think about it. And yeah, if you just can't face doing it, now I hope that you've got some motivation after the session. All right, anything in closing from anybody, your last chance to ask questions or to make any points? No? Happy? Okay, all right, good. Thanks, everybody. So if you're interested in the session this afternoon at 2 o'clock, oh, Andrea, your hand's up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to confirm that since we've now got the feedback on how to change, then do we just change and then resubmit? Okay.
Yes, if you want to. So we'll only be assessing these assignments at the end of the course. So what we want to just do now is just to see that everybody's on track with doing at least some of them, and we can give some input on them. And it was very useful for me to see those 6 that are there, so I can see what people are doing, and I can get a sense that there isn't one answer. We're going to get lots of different ways of approaching this assignment, and that's fine. So it's really, we'll give some feedback, but we won't be assigning a mark now. We'll do that right at the end. So it's really for you to get that assignment drafted, submitted. You can go back and make changes, and when it's the final submission, you can make changes again.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right, okay. So gee, the assignments, yeah. Put them in the spot a bit, but that's fine. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you if you're coming this afternoon, where it's the collection documentation assignment that we'll be looking at. So we might see you later. Bye everyone.